I'm Gladys. Standing on the upper level of the airport terminal, I watched as chaos unfolded below. My sister, Stella, was having a full-blown meltdown, her face red with rage, screaming at the top of her lungs. My parents, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, looked bewildered and defeated, their shoulders slumped as they tried to make sense of what was happening. It was a scene I had both anticipated and dreaded, and now, as I watched it play out, a strange sense of calm washed over me. It all started a year ago. I was a hard-working architect, spending long hours at the office to make ends meet. Meanwhile, my sister, Stella, who was 10 years younger than me, lived a life of luxury. She had inherited a large sum of money from our grandparents and spent it on designer clothes, fancy cars, and expensive vacations. Our parents, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, were wealthy but had always favored Stella. They saw her as the life of the party, the one who brought excitement and drama into their lives. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one, the reliable daughter who always did as she was told. When Stella announced her engagement to a man named Victor, a so-called venture capitalist, my parents were over the moon. They planned a lavish trip to Hawaii to celebrate the engagement, and I, being the dutiful daughter, spent 60 hours a week for a year to afford 4 first-class tickets to Honolulu and luxury suites at a high-end resort. The total cost of the trip was $34,000, a significant amount for me, but I thought it was worth it to make my family happy. On the day of our departure, we arrived at the airport. The air in Terminal 4 was thick with the smell of jet fuel and expensive coffee. We were standing by the premium check-in counter when Stella suddenly exploded. "You did this on purpose, Gladys," she shrieked. "You knew I wanted the window seat on the first leg. You're always trying to ruin things for me." Before I could even react, her hand came crashing down on my cheek. The sting was intense, but what hurt more was the cold, hollow silence that followed. Dozens of eyes were suddenly fixed on us, and I could feel the heat rising in my face. My father, Mr. Thompson, stepped forward, not to comfort me, but to put a protective arm around Stella. "For heaven's sake, Gladys, apologize," he hissed, his eyes darting around at the onlookers. "You know how stressed your sister gets before travel. Why do you always have to be so difficult?" My mother, Mrs. Thompson, was already dabbing at Stella's non-existent tears. "Your father is right. We're supposed to be celebrating her engagement, and you're souring the mood before we even leave the ground. Just say you're sorry so we can go." They had no idea. They didn't see the countless hours I had spent working to afford this trip. They didn't see the quiet architect who had designed their dream retirement home while Stella squandered her inheritance on frivolous things. The injustice felt like a heavy weight on my shoulders, heavier than the carry-on bag at my side. I stepped back, my heels clicking on the polished linoleum, creating a distance that they didn't even notice. To them, I was just retreating into my usual silence. But inside, something was breaking. For years, I had been the reliable one, the shadow daughter who paid the bills and kept the family afloat. When the family business collapsed 3 years ago, I was the one who quietly funneled my savings into their accounts, letting them believe government grants had saved them. As Stella continued her tirade, complaining about the lack of respect she received, I felt a cold, crystallized realization. I wasn't just paying for a trip, I was paying for my own degradation. I walked towards a self-service kiosk, my movements mechanical and precise. My parents were too busy admiring Stella's new engagement ring, a ring I suspected was as fake as her tears, to notice me leave the circle. I pulled up the master booking on the screen. 4 tickets for luxury suites at the resort stared back at me. My finger hovered over the Manage Booking button. A memory surfaced of Stella laughing behind my back at dinner, telling Victor that I was too boring to ever find a man who would take me to Hawaii, so she'd have to allow me to tag along. What she didn't know was that I had hired a private investigator to do a background check on Victor. The report, sitting in my encrypted cloud drive, was filled with red flags. Victor was not a venture capitalist but a serial debtor with 3 open fraud cases. The screen flickered as I entered the cancellation code. "Are you sure you want to void these reservations?" the prompt asked. I didn't hesitate. 1 tap for my father, 1 for my mother, and 1 for the darling sister who thought my face was her personal canvas. I kept my own ticket. I updated my seat to a different flight leaving in 2 hours from a separate gate. As I walked away from the kiosk, I caught a glimpse of them through a gap in the crowd. They were still at the counter arguing with the agent about a lost luggage tag. They looked so confident in their entitlement, so sure that I would always be there to pick up the pieces. I reached into my pocket and felt the small USB drive I had intended to give Stella as a wedding gift. It contained the truth about Victor, the man she was about to marry. I had planned to tell her privately in the serenity of the islands, but now I realized she didn't want the truth. She wanted a stage. As I headed towards the lounge, my phone buzzed. It was a message from the private investigator. "He's at the airport, Gladys, Terminal 1. He isn't flying to Hawaii. He's booked for Vegas on a one-way ticket using your parents' emergency credit card." I stopped in my tracks. The betrayal went deeper than a slap. Stella wasn't just the favorite, she was being played, and she was using my parents' last bit of credit to fund her own destruction. I looked back at the check-in counter. The agent's face had gone pale as she stared at her monitor. She was about to tell them the tickets didn't exist. I turned my back on them and disappeared into the stream of travelers. The heavy burden of their lives finally fell from my shoulders. I watched from the upper level as Stella's screams echoed through the terminal. My parents looked lost and confused, their world crumbling around them. I pulled out my phone and watched the notifications flood in. "Gladys, where are you? The tickets aren't showing up. Gladys, pick up the phone right now." I ignored them all. Instead, I opened the business banking app. The emergency credit card they were currently trying to use to fix the situation was a secondary card on my account. I hadn't just voided their tickets, I had frozen every line of credit they had access to. The PI's second message confirmed that Victor had already been flagged at Terminal 1. He was currently being detained for attempting to use a stolen card to book a high-stakes gambling suite. I had reported that the moment Stella's palm landed on my jaw. Security arrived 10 minutes later. Their heavy boots thudding against the polished linoleum sounded like justice. It wasn't because of the cancelled tickets. The airline doesn't call the police for a simple booking error. It was because the merchant services at the terminal had flagged my stolen card report. I watched from the shadows of a pillar as my mother clutched her chest, performing the role of the victim for the crowd, while my father tried to explain the unfortunate misunderstanding to 2 stern-faced officers. Stella was still hysterical, pointing wildly towards the premium lounge, where she assumed I was hiding, waiting to be scolded. She didn't see me standing in plain sight, my sleek blonde ponytail and sapphire gray eyes reflecting a cold, crystal, and calm she would never understand. For 20 years, I had been the invisible pillar of this family. Now that I'd stepped aside, the roof wasn't just leaking, it was collapsing. The darling sister was finally the center of a very public scene, but this time, the eyes on her weren't filled with admiration. They were judgmental, recording the meltdown on hundreds of smartphones for the world to see. I checked my watch. My new flight, a solo journey to a private estate on the north shore of Kauai, was boarding at the far end of the terminal. I had spent my entire life waiting for them to love the girl behind the bank account. The slap was the final payment on a debt I never owed. I stood up, smoothed the lapels of my blazer, and walked towards my gate, leaving the wreckage of their entitlement behind in the terminal dust. The air in Kauai smelled of hibiscus, wet earth, and salt, a world away from the sterile recycled oxygen of the airport. I sat in the garden of the villa I had designed myself but never visited. The lush green foliage and soft pink blossoms created the exact sanctuary I had envisioned for a person who no longer existed. My phone was off, but I had one final task before I fully disappeared into the Pacific blue. I logged into our family portal from an encrypted laptop and uploaded the full dossier the PI had gathered on Victor. The fraud cases, the 4 other fiancés in different states, the gambling debts he had been paying off with my parents' blind trust, money they didn't realize I had replenished 3 times. I added a final note at the bottom. The family business didn't survive because of luck. It survived because I bought the debt in secret. You've been living in my house, spending my salary, and striking the hand that fed you. Consider this my resignation from the family. The twist that stunned the public wasn't just the viral video of a princess having a meltdown. It was the news cycle that followed, detailing how a prominent family had been systematically defrauded by a con man they chose over their own daughter. As the sun began to set, casting a golden cinematic glow over the garden, I realized that the sting on my cheek had finally faded. In its place was the terrifying, beautiful weight of being completely, utterly free. I wasn't the shadow daughter anymore. I was the architect of my own life, and for the first time, the view was perfect.